What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, which we do live every single Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time to talk about the fantasy football week to come. And if I'm talking about fantasy football over here at sharpfootballanalysis.com, there's only one person to talk to, a man who, to the best of my knowledge, has not yet bolted for a college job, the Swami of Konami himself, Mr. Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing good, man. It's week 15. We're closing in on Christmas. Like there's light at the end of the tunnel. Not that we always want football to end, but it's been a long journey.
Yeah. How about, are the Zips calling you? Are they trying
The
to
Zips now, yeah.
what about Youngstown State? What about the Penguins? Have
I would
they
go. I would be a Penguin if they would take me. I went to Toledo, so I was a Rocket. So
Yeah, Rocket, man. Yeah, so you can't be with the Zips. That would be
me and
that'd be a
Lance Moore
travesty.
hanging out. We weren't.
I
We weren't
do
hanging out.
this whole this whole Belichick thing is so funny to me because like the conversation around Belichick is like, how's he going to talk to these college kids? Where it seems to me that it is far more often that a college coach will go to the NFL and realize he can't just treat them like they're not people in the NFL because they're all making a ton of money. And when NFL coaches, I mean, Bill Belichick managed an NFL locker room with like stars for a really long time. They all appear to love him, and everybody's like, "How's he going to talk to 18-year-olds?" I don't know. Have you watched him on TV? Like this past year, he's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Like it's such a weird thing. Like if a college coach comes to the NFL and is not able to just rule with an iron fist, Urban Meyer comes to mind. That's the real concern. But whenever the NFL coach goes down, they go, "Oh yeah, no, I just treat them like human beings, like I had to do in the NFL as well." And it suddenly seems to work out. It's such a funny discussion around this, but I don't know. I don't know why I felt the need to throw off Bill Belichick hot takes, but I've just been reading a lot of Belichick lately, and it's funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because he was so close to their all-time record, right? I think that's why a lot of people thought he was going to stay in the NFL at
Yeah.
least for a couple of years, just to try to get that to run down Don Shula. But hey, man, to each their own. I hope he lives his best life. To be fair, Belichick too, for as much as people thought he was a curmudgeon over the course of his career, I remember after one of the Super Bowls they won, he was on Howard Stern the next day when I was working at a warehouse fantasy football days, and he was like very cordial and just like down to earth dude. And I was like, oh, he's like nothing like as a person, probably like anyone thinks he is. He's probably a
Yeah.
cool dude.
Yeah, like as it turns out, when he's angry and forced to do press conferences, that's not a great glimpse into his personality.
Yeah.
Um, and as Toops puts in the chat, I wasn't going to say this, Toops, but his girlfriend could translate any of the "you speak" for him. So there we go. Maybe, hey,
Whatever skibbity
he's
toilets he has to talk about or whatever's going on. The Riz, does he have the Riz?
he's playing the long game on this one. Little did we know that this was an investment in his college future. That was little did we know that that's what was happening. That's what
Hey
was
man,
happening
good for
here.
Bill, man.
I would like the kids to go back and watch a great Rodney Dangerfield movie about about back to school. I like to watch them that because that's all that's going to run through my mind the entire time here. All right, that's it for us. We have an important week of fantasy football coming up, week 15, the first round of the fantasy playoffs in most fantasy football leagues. We definitely want to talk about that. I did want to kind of introduce the idea though that this is an interesting week simply based on some of the lines that we see. There are 7 home underdogs this week. 6 of those are by 3 or more points, or by more than 3 points, excuse me. 2 of those are by more than 7 points. Those kind of weeks to me always like stick out as, you know, weeks that a lot of the things that we expect to happen and like the game scripts that we would expect, maybe that's not going to happen. And so I would just say to be wary about a lot of these road favorites and kind of what you think is going to be if you're basing kind of your fantasy predictions on expected game state. I think we're probably fine with the Ravens, although, Giants double-digit home dogs. I like a double-digit home dogs, but I think we're probably fine with them. But it's just an interesting week to see this many road favorites. I assume, late in the season we have a better idea of who's good and who's not, and so it's not that surprising. But these types of weeks always to me feel like, all right, a little bit of caution, a yield sign flashes in front of me, and I say maybe we don't know as much as we think we do, and we should be a little bit wary of some of these.
Yeah, I can see that. I will say too, I think in context of just this individual season, I've said this before, but this is the most NBA NFL season I can recall. the have-nots, there are more have-nots than ever. Like you look at like the tankathon, we brought this up. I mean, there are so many teams still drawing live for the number one pick, where typically with like 3 weeks to go, we're down to like 2 teams, maybe 3. And man, there are just so many teams that are sitting on like 3 wins right now. So I think that also has a lot to play in it, is that there's a bigger delta between the have-nots this year.
Yeah, and I think you look at a lot of these bad teams, like they're really, like you said, they're bad. Like the Giants are really bad. Like this is a big problem. So maybe it all ends up working out. And like I said, maybe we're late enough in the season that we know enough about these teams to feel good about it. But it's just, something sticking in my brain. A lot of questions already in the chat. I figure we get to a few of these right now. Eli asked, crazy for wanting to start Russell Wilson instead of Jordan Love. That to me does seem crazy, based on kind of what we know about this Eagles defense and what we know about his supporting cast, at least at receiver this week. But I do think, like, at the heart of that question, the kind of trepidation about Jordan Love is kind of, it does make some sense this week given where they're playing, and kind of what's been happening lately in that Packers offense.
Yeah, I think it's hard to want to willingly play Russ, right? Because I think his floor and ceiling are both compromised. We saw last week without George Pickens, sub 60% completion rate, 6.1 yards per pass attempt. Some of the game script, influenced his total yardage, but this team just doesn't have a lot of playmakers going against the hottest defense in the NFL over the past 2 months. It's just really hard to generate a lot of buzz, especially in the fantasy playoffs, right? Like it's just really hard to see like a lot of upside for Russell Wilson, where Jordan Love at least has had a stable floor. Like Jordan Love hasn't had the spike weeks that he had last year. And hey, listen, regression comes for everybody. I mean, he was a guy that overshot his expected touchdowns by a massive amount last year. Still does have a high touchdown rate this year. They pulled the reins back a little bit, been a little bit more run heavy. But he has only 2 weeks this season where he's been in the back half of quarterback scoring. Like he still held a really stable floor, and that game has a lot more shootout potential, I think, than Eagles Steelers does too. So I think from floor plus ceiling, Love just still is a very more optimal play than Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I mean 100%. But I think you brought up there is still reason. There's reason that you are even considering this. There's reason that, like, you have been disappointed by Jordan Love, and so yeah, I get it entirely. But this is not the spot. This is not the one. Another kind of start sit question. We don't do a ton of these, but it's week 15. Let's do them. Goff or Kyler?
These are
I think
playoff
this one is
teams.
these are playoff teams. Goff or Kyler? I think this one is interesting because of the season that we've seen from Jared Goff. You've likened it to a Tua Tagovailoa season in which we haven't always gotten the spike weeks. We did kind of get one last week,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. We could have this, we're going to talk about this Bills-Lions game. I mean, the highest total on the slate, the highest total I've seen for a while, at 54.5 right now, at least when I checked this morning. And so we have this shootout potential. But as you and I have also brought up several times in like the past month, this is the stretch of games we were waiting on for Kyler. This is when we wanted him to, hopefully kind of end this entire offense, this running game, everything to break out. So that's a tough one for me. I don't really have a strong lean either way. Where are you with Goff versus Kyler?
I think they're both really pretty solid plays. I would hope that this isn't like where it dictates the actual outcome in the matchup. I do like both a lot. I actually have both of these quarterbacks and Bo Nix in a super flex league, and like I have all 3 guys like as basically QB1s, and I think I'm going to sit Nix out of the 3. Basically, just play the Goff game script I guess we'll talk about Bills Lions, but like in general, I think that the Lions have kind of the recipe of what combats the Bills defense really well. And like the Rams had that too. And we were kind of talking about that last week. I think the Lions have that definite blueprint too, as well, that they can do a lot of the things that the Rams did. And Ben Johnson can give Goff like a stable floor game plus ceiling. So I guess if you were just really playing it from a floor perspective, I would say just Goff. But if you do want to shoot from upside, I do think this is the stretch for Kyler Murray to have a really big game. If you've been following the worksheet, and I hope many of you have that listen to the show, you've largely been off on Kyler. I think very on, I had him as a sell for basically the whole season for his schedule. I mean, since week 5, he's played the 49ers, the Packers, the Chargers, the Dolphins, the Bears, the Jets, the Seahawks twice, and the Vikings in order. And not one of those teams is in the back half of passing points allowed per attempt in the NFL. Not one of them. And then he also faced the Lions and Bills in two of his opening 4 games, which also are in the top 10. So like he has just not had any free squares. Now he's going to have this playoff run where it looks optimal. Patriots are 27th in passing points allowed per attempt. They have allowed over 20 fantasy points to Anthony Richardson, to Matthew Stafford over their past 3 games. We've seen guys like Mason Rudolph score almost 18 fantasy points against them. So there is a lot of opportunity, I think, here for Kyler and the ghost of Marvin Harrison. If somehow gamers that use the 1-2 turn on Marvin Harrison are still playing, he is actually drawing live this week as well.
Ghost of Marvin Harrison. The young man's what, like 22? Like, what are we doing? The
We
ghost
killed
of
him this
Marvin
year,
Harrison.
though. He was dead.
Fair enough. Yeah, it
Fantasy
did
will
not
write
work
you
out.
off quick, man.
Yeah, it didn't work out for him in the first round. If you listen to this podcast in August, you probably wouldn't have drafted him there. So there you go. Hey, we got a win. We got Saquon
That's
Barkley
true.
and not drafting Marvin Harrison. Those are our two. Those are our
Maybe
two
we'll
wins.
do a
Put
recap show
it on
at
the
the end of
board.
the season, and we'll take our losses and tout our wins.
Oh, I'm much more interested in the losses. I love
Yeah.
the the sadomasochism of the losses. We were wrong about Jaden Reed. We have been less wrong about Jaden Reed. Thank you, producer Matt, for flowing that up there. We have been less wrong about Jaden Reed as of late. To be fair, we've come around on the
I think we
Jaden
ultimately
Reed.
ended up being right.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I don't know if I'd go that far. But we had some of our concerns, and then one more here, and then I'll get back to the questions later on. We'll kind of move on as we go through. This is actually a question about Thursday night. For those of you listening, this is a podcast on Friday. We record this every single Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. You head over to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You will find us. You can subscribe, get notified when we go live. Warren Sharp will be live on Friday at noon. So make sure you're doing that if you like our content and like paying attention to us. This question does have Brock Purdy tonight, and I want to specifically say here from Phil. I know that Phil read the worksheet because Phil says, should I go with Brock Purdy tonight because you see that he's a trust in the worksheet, or should I go with Jaden Daniels, who Rich has ranked higher? And I do think that from both to answer this question, because he can't take that to the Sunday chat, but also just from like a theoretical perspective of kind of what you view trust kind of in that worksheet. Kind of how do you view these types of situations where you really like Brock Purdy but you still have Daniels ranked higher?
Right. Yeah. And that's the difference. So like the trust label is like basically a player providing a spike week in context of that player. Like this would be like Brock Purdy is basically typically this season basically operates as like a fringe QB1. I think he's more of like a mid-range QB1, but I still have Jaden Daniels higher because his floor and ceiling have consistently been higher than Brock Purdy's. He's also indoors in a great matchup, high team total. Like it's I think it's hard to get away from just the safety net that Daniels provides plus the upside he provides in his matchup. But I do think this is in context of Brock Purdy games. I want to be one of the better Brock Purdy games.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. I know you do the rankings. I trust your rankings more, but like I do have concerns here about how much we're going to push here with Daniels. Like I know both you and I
You
are
just
going to
have so
be
many outs through the rushing, man. Like it's just so
the
weighted.
rushing helps. Yeah, the rushing certainly helps. But I know you and I are going to be heavy on Brian Robinson this week, both from like a props perspective and probably a DFS perspective, I assume, although he will be very popular. So we'll have to kind of weigh that. But that's, there is an avenue here to Daniels not really having that ceiling game and Purdy hitting a ceiling game. So that avenue does exist, although I do think you're probably right to have Daniels kind of weighted ahead. All right, we'll get back to the chat here in a bit. I do want to mention, if you have just basic start sit questions, you can go to Rich's rankings, as he just explained there. You can go to the worksheet and read more context about those rankings. All of those are part of our NFL Plus package. The NFL Plus package also comes with Warren Sharp's betting recommendations. $100 bettors up over $11,000 following Warren Sharp's betting recommendations this year. You can use promo code SAVE325 to save $325 on the NFL Plus package for the rest of the season. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis, check that out. And like I said, get access to the worksheet, get access to Rich Hribar's rankings, get access to the Sunday morning subscriber only chat, which he answers. Any question you throw at him, he'll answer. I'm throwing that out there. Any question about any topic, doesn't even have to be about football.
Yeah, we'll
He will
talk about it.
answer your question.
No politics.
If you if you need help on a physics homework, he's the man for you. And
Ooh,
so
tough,
co-
long ways away. My son is in college and he had to take a biology class, and I was like, ooh, I was like, I'm long removed from. I'll help you out as much
did
as I
you bring
can.
out did you bring out the old like genetic Foursquare box? Remember that they made us do in biology in ninth grade? And you're like, why do I need to know this? Like, I've not since used that. It's only when you see somebody with blue eyes that you start to like remember, like you have vague, faint memories of ghost of a biology teacher's past. Like, wait a minute, how do the blue eyes show up? Like, that's the only thing I remember from biology. So there we are. I did want to do one real or fake this week. I here we are, real or fake, the best graphic in the business. I didn't want to do one real or fake this week. I figured we have a lot of more, a lot more discounts and all of that. I mean, a lot more questions and stuff like that being week 15. But I wanted to talk about Jaleel McLaughlin, and the reason I want to talk about Jaleel McLaughlin is because we're in this really weird situation with the Broncos, in which every time the Broncos, yeah, I believe you said, and we don't want any of the other connotations with this. Javonte Williams is probably a wonderful person, but you said that he's kind of on the football field exclusively, like the Deshaun Watson of running backs. Whereas anytime anybody else shows up in the backfield, they do great. But like they continue just to roll out Javonte Williams. And obviously, Javonte Williams early in his career before the injury was outstanding. The injury
Yeah.
is very
So
clearly
was
taken
Deshaun
something from
Watson.
him. I'm not. We're just moving straight past that.
You
We're going
brought
right
it up.
past
You
it.
brought it up, not me.
Moving right past it. But the injury has obviously taken something from him, and that is awful because he was so good, he was so fun to watch. But the reality of the situation now is that Javonte Williams is just he's not very productive as a runner. He's averaged 3.6 yards per carry, an 8.9% explosive rate this season. 21.8% of his runs have been for 0 or negative yards. And then you look at the other two backs that they given carries to, and we're not even including Tyler Batty, which, what happens if he doesn't have that injury right after his kind of little breakout. But Jaleel McLaughlin, 4.6 yards per carry, 13.8% explosive rate, 16.3% negative rate. Audric Estime, 4.7 yards per carry, 12.2% explosive rate, 9.8% negative rate. It's just been better. Both of those guys have just been better. The problem is that we've seen this now 3 times now, right? This is the third time, at least with McLaughlin. We saw it with Batty, we saw it with Estime, and every time Javonte Williams has just come back and just been the starter the next week. And so I guess the real or fake question is, Jaleel McLaughlin will actually get the carries this week, will have the starting job, or are we just going back to Javonte Williams?
Maybe. I mean, listen, it's Sean Payton. I mean, I don't have the clear answer. Here's what I believe is going to happen. They will start with Javonte Williams. They will see how he's running. And if he's not running optimally, they will give another running back shots and they will see how that running back is running. And then they will kind of let the game flow kind of dictate. That's what they've been doing the last month. That's literally what they're doing. So, but the bummer is that even if McLaughlin, who has had the hot hand, the last 2 games, can he still get in at the goal line? Can he still get those money
Yeah.
touches we want? And that's kind of the one hang up. If I was to chase a Denver running back, if I had an RB2 spot that was just really thin and desperate, I mean, he would be the one guy I would at least kind of be coaxed into playing, but it is just a very nebulous backfield. And they're playing Marvin Mims in the backfield too. He's getting snaps in the backfield. He's not running the ball, but like they're using, him as like kind of like a back out of the backfield on some passing plays. So it's just Sean Payton throwing a lot of things at the wall. Everyone outside of Cortland Sutton largely has been rotated. And Devaughn Vele has kind of like settled into that slot role, but like everything else is really nebulous.
Yeah, I know that. Have we decided it is Vele and not Vele? I actually don't
I
know
don't
how to
know.
pronounce his.
I actually
Yeah,
don't know
well,
either.
we need to look that up. Producer Matt, can you look over pronunciation for us? I don't like mispronouncing people's names if at all possible. But I know that this week you're kind of a little bit in on him, which makes sense. But like you said, that wide receiver rotation behind Cortland Sutton, and we never even got Josh Reynolds back, right? They cut him
They
off
cut
of
him, yeah.
IR, and
Little
so
Jordan
like we haven't
Humphrey is
ever.
gonna get some targets, who's not little
He's
at
there.
all. It's
No,
very frustrating.
I have always enjoyed that. Troy Franklin is, going to get looks. Marvin Mims going to get looks. I did really like the Sean Payton quote about Marvin Mims, which was like, "Yeah, we didn't even think about that we could use him in the backfield, and now we're doing that, and that's cool." And I'm like, this guy. All Marvin Mims has done since he was drafted, since the beginning of last year, all Marvin Mims has done is create big plays, and they just don't play him. It's really interesting, this whole usage pattern. But you're right. Outside of Cortland Sutton, we just don't know. It's one of those kind of offenses that we would expect to have. We would expect to be happier about the fantasy situation, given what we've gotten out of Bo Nix, given what we've gotten out of Cortland Sutton, given the fact that this week they're going up against the Colts. It's a great matchup. The Colts going up to 6 most points to backfields this year. And yeah, there's not enough certainty there. And it's a strange one. I actually think, talking about moving on to kind of talking about a few of the games, I don't want to spend a ton of time on college play-by-play said that it's Vele from
All right.
producer Matt. So thank you, producer Matt. I do want to talk. I don't want to talk too much about this game, the Packers at the Seahawks, because I do think it's a very good game. The Packers are 3-point favorites. Another one of those ones, 45.5 point total. But we had a question here about DK. Is this the week I trust DK? And it reminded me, like, my thought process on these two offenses is these are two of the most fantasy tilting good offenses in the league. Like, these are two of those offenses that you just like. Packers receivers are so up and down from week to week. As we mentioned, we're kind of coming around on Jaden Reed being right on him. Geno Smith doesn't throw touchdowns. DK Metcalf doesn't catch passes anymore. Like, there's so much going on in this offense. It's so tilting to watch as as someone who just wants fantasy points for the best players. Obviously, we've gotten there with Jackson Smith and Jigba, but like, are there any other good offenses that you watch and you're like, I just don't know what we're going to get out of these guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any quite like these two. Well, the Packers are number one for sure, right? Like, they're
Yeah.
easily by far the first. There are a couple other like kind of spots that do get a little frustrating. Well, one, this Eagles passing game is very
We'll talk
frustrating.
about them. We'll talk about them later.
But that's it. And then you got the obviously what's gone on with the Chiefs this year is another one that sticks out. That definitely is, but nothing like, I think, like the Packers in general, just because they have a bunch of like a bunch of wide receiver twos, right? That they're just throwing at the wall. Then they've gotten run heavy since they're bye. The Seahawks, at least we know largely who's getting the ball. It's just that Geno Smith's run to a really unlucky season in terms of touchdown production. I still have him basically 7 passing touchdowns below expectations this year. And sometimes in a small sample that is the NFL season, that doesn't get course corrected. It's very frustrating. It seems to be something that we won't have course corrected. And now that Seattle's defense has come around, they're not throwing the ball as much as they were early in the season. Whereas earlier in the season, you could say, all right, we can at least stock into some of these touchdowns maybe coming because Geno's throwing it 40 to 45 times a game. And now the defense is good. That's been like 30 times a game. So this game could be slower than expected with the Packers running more, the Seattle defense playing well. So we'll see. I will say, though, the past month since DK Metcalf came back, if you read the worksheet, I've been on Jackson Smith and Jigba over DK all 4 of those games based on the matchups. Jackson Smith and Jigba has run into a really hot run of teams that struggle against slot receivers. And this is the first matchup since DK's return where it kind of oscillates back. And the Packers are getting Jair Alexander back on Sunday night. So it does add a little bit of wrench to that. But the Packers have been one of the better teams against slot receivers this season. We saw a little bit of that Thursday where Amon-Ra really didn't get over. So this might be a spot where DK kind of is more even. But both of those guys are still getting a lot of targets. DK this year is interesting when we go back and look at it because you go back to Shane Waldron, and he was getting, for the first time in his career, a lot of underneath targets, those fantasy smoothing targets where you just don't have to live on the big plays. And now his first year under Ryan Grubb, over 30% of his targets are over 20 yards downfield. That's a career high. So he's been a little bit more feast or famine because of the types of targets he's getting. But I still do think in a fantasy playoff setting with this individual matchup where the Packers have given up some of their points on longer plays, he does represent to have one of his better upside spots that he's had over the past month. He's run like 2 of the games are against the Cardinals, and we talk about all the time. Like, this is a team that just literally lives to prevent big plays. That's like all they're out to do. And that swerved into these are Jackson Smith and Jigba games. And the 49ers are the same boat. The 49ers really struggle against slot receivers. They don't try to think of plays by a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 6. This is like the first matchup where DK, it's like, all right, he could hit one here. And I saw in the chat that the individual question was versus like Sincere McCormick. Like to me, that's like Sincere McCormick. Like you're just hoping he falls in the end zone and like gets you 80 yards. Like DK still like he could get you 20, 25. I just don't really believe that's largely in the range of outcomes for McCormick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about McCormick later. Spoiler alert for Uncut Gems. But yeah, the kind of upside you have in that offense and that Raiders offense attached to perhaps Desmond Ritter starting. We still don't know as we're recording this kind of what that's going to look like. We'll see. We'll see about air casted Aiden O'Connell's bone bruise and whether or not that's going to, whatever that's going to turn into. And so, yeah, but like you want to take that upside outcome, especially here in the fantasy playoffs, and kind of really chase that. And
We're not
so
playing for
even
friendly
though I'm a
losses right now.
yeah, exactly. We're not who cares? You lose by 2, you lose by 50. It's still a loss. Like it doesn't matter. We're not worried about accumulating points. Yeah, so go for the ceiling, go for broke. And I mean, I'm saying that as like I've been driving the McCormick bus. Like as soon as Zamir White and Madison got hurt, I go, "Hey, this McCormick kid, you should watch this." And so if I'm saying that, yeah, you should probably play DK Metcalf. I do. There are a couple other questions here. I just want to bring up this question from Merrick because I how this is just a flex. This is only a flex. I mean, we could use it to talk about Justin Jefferson, but his question is, would you start Nico Collins over Justin Jefferson this week? What are we doing? Enjoy your championship. Enjoy your championship.
I would
I
love to
do
know
think
who the other guys are. I assume he just also has Jamar Chase and like, yeah,
Puka.
hilarious.
Puka's on the team too. Yeah, enjoy your championship. But I do think there is an interesting thing in there about Justin Jefferson and how the Bears have done very well against number one receivers. Well, what we saw from Justin Jefferson the last time these two teams played. You're obviously playing Justin Jefferson in almost all situations, unless you have the most stacked team of all time. Why are you playing this week? Why aren't you on bye? I have many questions about that team. We could talk offline. But but yeah, so in all situations, you are starting Justin Jefferson. But like from a DFS perspective, can we kind of expect that ceiling outcome, especially since we've seen Jordan Addison take on a lot more targets recently? He's actually out targeted Jefferson over the last month. How are you kind of treating him in DFS? I guess was the question.
Yeah, they play on Monday night, so it's largely just the 2 game
Yeah,
slate. But it probably would have been one where we would have been more cautious on him. Where last week we were more bullish on him. But I still think from a fantasy sense, he has a ton of upside. Remember in that game, he also had, I believe it was a 60-yard touchdown called back on kind of a questionable, legal screen play by
I'm going to
Brandon
go
Powell.
further than kind of. I'm going to go further than kind of questionable on that one. That one was, I I have a lot of Justin Jefferson in dynasty leagues, and that one put me onto full tilt. I was so bad when I saw that call.
Also,
It's also possible that
I was
I'm not objective in that. So there we go.
yeah, and you know what I think it always is just like where you're coming at. Did you have Justin Jefferson or are you a Bears fan and
Yeah,
those types of things? But
those
I
are the
think Addison
questions.
playing well though this past month is ultimately going to be good for Justin Jefferson, like big picture, right? Like
Yeah.
because now Addison is starting to shred with all his attention to Jefferson, and it's just going to make teams question how much they devote to Jefferson, right? And if he gets any more one-on-one chances, and Jefferson's had such a high floor outside of the one game, and we always see this. What happened in a lot of these rematches isn't always what happens in the actual rematch too. So I would say, hey, you already took on the worst Justin Jefferson game. He's got a very low floor to be better. Do I like Nico Collins more? I do.
What a time, man! You dream for teams like that. A dream for teams like that. This is kind of unrelated from Tom. How is that team where you drafted Brian Robinson with a few buddies and the old guy came back and
Go Silva.
apparently,
Go Silva.
oh Silva's the one who got mad about y'all drafting
He was
Brian
mad that
Robinson.
we had Brian Robinson. And I told him you'll be grateful we had him. So like every time Brian Robinson scores a touchdown, we have like a group text that I just do #grateful in like the text. And he laughs. But he came around like 3 weeks in. He was like, yeah, he was good. But that team ended up not being good. So we are
Fair
not
enough.
we are not in the playoffs.
But
We had
you
like
did your
Stephon
part.
Diggs. We started with
Oh,
CeeDee Lamb. We took Stephon
oof.
Diggs. We had Brandon Ayuk. It was a nightmare run out. Mark Andrews,
No,
like just
no good.
didn't happen.
Well, you you, me, and Curtis Hirsch from also Sharp Football Analysis writes our Start Sit article you should read every week. We drafted one over at FFPC. And we made the playoffs. I know you don't check, so I know you have no idea which best ball teams have made the playoffs. But we made it. Congratulations, Rich. We're competing
Yeah,
for
I don't
that.
remember who we took on that one, but I'm pretty happy about it. Anytime you're in the FFBC, because you just have live bullets, right? Like live bullets,
Yeah,
man. Hey,
you gotta love it. You gotta love live bullets. We
because
drafted
I
Noah
believe
Brown late to
you just try
upset
to
you,
get the
and
free
now he's
roll.
out for the rest of the season.
Oh yeah. Hey, we got up probably 2 games out of him.
Yeah, no, that team. I was looking at that team. We scored pretty well last week. We got we got a shot. We got some chances. We've got some
Who's on
bullets
that
to
team?
fire on
Not
that
to
team.
do the thing, like.
Lamar is on that team,
Oh, okay.
which we'll see about. We'll see about this week. Mark Andrews is on that team again. We'll see about this week. And so, yeah, that one's not
Well,
not
Mark Andrews
too
in a
not
best
too bad.
ball versus season long ended up being a different story.
Yeah, it was a much more exciting uh place to have him was in best ball where you didn't have to play the week to week touchdown game. But I mean, the thing about Andrews is, and we're not talking about that game because, like I said, the Ravens are 16-point favorites. But like the thing about Andrews is that recently, especially like the last 2 weeks, like you've been happy with his usage. Like I'm very comfortable playing Mark Andrews now. I don't know what the volume's going to be this week, and so like I'm not going to like go out and really like try to make a great case for him. But I am very comfortable with where Mark Andrews' usage is at this point. And so I'm happy with kind of what we see the rest of the season. Although their schedule quietly isn't great, especially for the passing game, because they're such big favorites here, the Giants, and then they get the Steelers. So, we'll see. We'll see where the Ravens go. All right, let's talk about that Bills at Lions game. Obviously, like, we've talked a little bit about kind of Jared Goff and this side of it. Lions 2.5 point home favorites, 54.5 point total. Like I said, one of the higher totals we've seen this year. I think, coming off a record-setting fantasy performance, I think we have to talk about Josh Allen first and kind of where we are with him. I thought it was interesting in the worksheet preview how you brought up that this is going to be a much different test for him than what we saw last week against the Rams.
Well, the Rams have literally been the team we've just highlighted every week. We hit about Brock Purdy to open. I mean, they're just such a bad pass defense consistently all year, and they've allowed so many spike weeks. Obviously, they didn't allow the highest scoring quarterbacking game in NFL history before last week, but Josh Allen got there, a negative game script. Could have negative game script again, but the Lions have only allowed more than one touchdown pass in one game this season. So like it is a totally different flip. I mean, they go from, I think it's the 31st. He just faced a team that's 31st in passing points allowed per attempt to the team that's first. So it is a tougher match. It looks like the Lions are getting a little healthier on the defensive line. Keep the bookmarked on what happens today in practice, but it looks like they might get McNeil back and DJ Reader and Josh Pascal all back this week to kind of help some things out up front. I do expect Josh Allen to run the football in this game. I expect Aaron Glenn to do what Aaron Glenn does, right? Like he's going to play aggressive. He's got the Dan Campbell gene. Like these guys were perfect for each other. He wants to play aggressive defense. He wants to play man coverage. He trusts his guys. And that historically, the past 3 years has led to a lot of rushing production for quarterbacks. And I believe Josh Allen is going to run for a lot of yards in this game. You know what you're getting out of Josh Allen. But yeah, the matchup's a little tougher. I don't think we're going to see Amari Cooper have 250 air yards this week. I think Shakir's in a good spot. It looks like we're going to get Coleman and Kincaid back. But yeah, I don't think that we're going to see them push 50. But hey, maybe they do. They've scored 30 or more in 7 straight games. So they're going to find a way to get there probably.
That last Amari Cooper catch cost me a pretty big win in a ticket win and a late only slate. Which if you played late only slate this past week, the scores of that were wild. So yeah, it cost me a ticket, and so he's now dead to me forever. On the receiving end of it, though, for Buffalo, it is interesting because we're almost certainly getting Keon Coleman back. We're almost certainly getting Dalton Kincaid back, right? And we've had this Khalil Shakir moment. He's been over 80% for his route rate each of the last 4 games. And I'm interested in how you think that's going to affect it. Getting Kincaid back, getting Coleman back. Like, do we still continue to get this run out that we've gotten from Shakir, who, doesn't get a ton of touchdowns, even though he made one happen last week. So we need him to be on the field and getting those targets. Are you kind of worried about what we get from him this week?
Not in this particular matchup. I think maybe going forward when we get some situations where you have Buffalo playing ahead and stuff, but like them being kind of road dogs against a team who I believe is equipped, and we can get into it to kind of really combat what Sean McDermott does on defense. I think this is going to be a drop back game for the Bills, especially the Lions are still so good against the run. Even last week against Josh Jacobs with all those linemen hurt, Jacobs got 3 touchdowns, but he only ran for 3 yards per carry. Like he just got the bunnies. He cashed him in. I don't believe the Bills, outside of Allen's rushing, are going to run the football with James Cook and Ray Davis effectively in this game. I think it's going to be a lot of 11 personnel in this game, and that's why Shakir, I believe, will be on the field a lot. And it's a good matchup for Shakir. You jokingly say, like I always talk about Shakir, he's never really in my DFS pool because he has 1 end zone target this season, and he said last week, "Screw your end zone targets. I'll just score from 50 yards out." I mean, this dude hit the golden mushroom, dude. He was like just turboed through all those dudes. So props to Shakir taking matters into his own hands because they never give him any goal line targets.
I think that Shakir, he can never be my favorite player in the NFL as long as Saquon Barkley is around. From we got Penn State connections, and I love Saquon Barkley. But in the non-Saquon Barkley kind of category, Shakir is high. I just love watching him play. I want them to recognize that he is their best option. We'll see kind of what Cooper can do as he continues to grow on the offense. Hopefully, runs more routes and all of that stuff. But like, I just love watching Khalil Shakir. You mentioned on the other side of it that this game sets up well for Goff. We kind of, you hit on that at the beginning of the show. You could certainly talk about that some more here, but also kind of the Amon-Ra St. Brown side of that as well, because it hasn't been as good of a run for St. Brown. The touchdowns have dried up, and we've kind of seen some of this floor kind of outcomes for him over the past few weeks. But it seems like everything that sets up well for Goff for this also happens to set up well for Amon-Ra as well.
Yeah, and just top down, I think when you look at what the Bills do defensively, they play very, kind of passive defense. They don't blitz a lot. They play a lot of zone coverage. They try to prevent a lot of big plays. They actually are 29th in the league in passing plays allowed of 10 or more yards, and they have allowed the lowest rate of passing plays of 20 or more yards. Very similar to very much like the Cardinals, but a better version of it. They've got better players, but they also don't play the run well at all. They give up a lot of yards before contact. And we saw a team like the Rams that can throw over the middle of the field and run the football really have no issues with them. We go back to earlier in the year, the Baltimore Ravens. What have the Baltimore Ravens done this year? They've run the football and thrown the ball over the middle of the field effectively all year. And like those are teams that like when they faced them, they had really trouble. This defense had a lot of trouble stopping those teams. And the Lions, like this is what they do. Like you do not want to come into Detroit and allow the most yards before carry to running backs, right? Like Ben Johnson is just going to dial up. You're going to get David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs fed down your throat until you decide to stop that. And then when you come up to try to stop that, they're going to be throwing over the top of those linebackers. Like this is what they do. So I do think that they're well equipped from a personnel stance and a philosophy stance to combat what Sean McDermott, wants to do defensively. So I do think that's a problem. And that ties into Amon-Ra when they are throwing. I do think the running backs are great plays. Like the one way that this game doesn't get there from like a real, like last week's Rams game, from like a real big fantasy stance, is if we don't get like the defensive touchdown. Because once that block punt happened in the Rams game, those are always the types of plays that like throw a game environment into like chaos. So if we don't get a defensive touchdown to do it, the one way we don't get there is if the Lions running backs just dominate this game. Like this could be a potential game where like the Lions running backfield has 40 plus touches. So if the Bills aren't ready to stop those guys, like that's how this game goes under. But if this game does go back and forth and we have, the Lions in a drop back game and they're trying to press the points, it does line up for Amon-Ra St. Brown in this particular matchup. He has been targeted on 25% of his routes, and it goes up to 27% target share per route run against zone coverage. He has wide splits against man coverage where it goes down. He also moves into slot for over 45% of his snaps. He has 32 receptions from the slot. The next closest player in the Lions has 10. Bills 31st in yards per target allowed to slot receivers. 51% of their catches allowed to wide receivers go to slot receivers. That's the second highest rate in the league. So I do think that while St. Brown's been disappointing the last 3 weeks, I do think this is a spot to kind of get back on him if you believe that this game environment pops.
Another game that I'm interested in this week, Bucs at Chargers. Chargers 3-point favorites, 45.5 point total. I mean, you presciently, I should say, brought up kind of the Justin Herbert. We should pump the brakes on Justin Herbert a little bit from a fantasy perspective a couple weeks ago, since he has 13 rushing yards and what, like one passing touchdown over those 2 games. We've seen, as you continue to bring up, Herbert not have the passing upside and been relying a little bit on his rushing ability. As multiple passing touchdowns, just 4 games this year, 0 passing scores in 3 games. But you look at this matchup against the Bucs, all of the injuries they have, the issues they have gotten healthier at corner, but the issues that they have kind of in defending the pass. And I wonder, is this a game where we're going back to Herbert, hoping for maybe a little bit more volume, hoping the Bucs can push them, especially if Herbert gets Lad McConkey back this week? Or do you still have a lot of the same similar concerns about him that you had, over the last couple of weeks when you were kind of pumping the brakes on him?
Yeah, I have concerns still because he's got the couple injuries too, so it's hard to expect him kind of just to start running again with 2 leg
Yep.
injuries. I also worry about the Buccaneers side of this, right? Pushing this. I mean, the Chargers have mushed everybody, like largely outside of the Ravens game, and there's one of the Bengals game. And like this Bucs team is not nearly as good the back half of the year in terms of generating explosives. Baker Mayfield he's throwing the ball to the other team multiple times a game. Like he has thrown
He
11
loves
interceptions
he
over his past
loves throwing terrible interceptions. He
yeah.
loves throwing terrible interceptions so he can set up the comeback. That is my working theory on Baker Mayfield.
I think
And
you have
he
to be
hey, to
cautious
be fair,
because the we were in a spot last week where it's like you go back to the Bucs because they were home favorites with a big team total against a bad defense. Now they're on the road with a team total way below what they've been under the season. They have a 21-point team total on the road against a defense that's allowed the fewest points in the NFL. I have questions about the Bucs side of this, and Bucky Irving being banged up doesn't help that cause either. But I do have questions that we get there in this game because I think this sets up to be kind of a Chargers do Chargers things type of game.
yeah, I could definitely see that as well. And I'm glad you brought up the backfield because the Bucks backfield is one that I was really toying with earlier this week when I was writing the waiver column, because it's about, like, what do you do with Bucky Irving? Uh, you know, is he even going to play? If he does play, is he get a setback? Can you go to Sean Tucker there? And then I looked at the game environment, and I'm kind of with you. Is I don't think this game is even going to kind of reach the total. I would take the under on this game just because of what we've seen the Chargers do and how we've seen the Chargers offense run. And then you take a look at Sean Tucker, and he had that one big game. To be fair to him, it was a game that Rashad White was out. And so if Bucky Irving's out, maybe you kind of get excited about it. But then they just haven't shown any real desire to use him at a high level. He didn't see a ton of the field last week when Irving was out. In the second half, it was all Rashad White. Even that game that he blew up, it was a 38% snap share, and then he completely fell off the next week. And so I look at this backfield, and I think kind of the best fantasy outcome for us for this backfield is that Bucky Irving just sits out and says, we're going to try to get this guy healthy. We're not going to, expose him to perhaps another aggravation, another injury. And then you just play Rashad White, and that's it. Because I just don't like playing this game in the fantasy playoffs with Sean Tucker or something like that. It just seems like a lot of chasing to me. And so it's a weird situation here that I'm hopeful almost that Bucky Irving, even though I have him in a lot of places, have him in a lot of underdog teams that have advanced, I'm kind of hopeful he sits out this week just so we get some clarity on this situation, because otherwise, like, it becomes really, really tough to make predictions about what we're going to get out of them.
Again, I think that's what a lot of gamers are just hoping for the Grendo situation to play out. It looks like he's going to play tonight. So you're doing that on Thursday night too, right?
Yeah.
There's no way that you're not going to be on tilt playing Grendo tonight. There's just no way. Cause you're like, cause if he has like 6 fantasy points, you're going to just stare at those 6 fantasy points for 3 days. But then if he hit, like it's a tough spot to be in.
If he gets 27 and he's on your bench, you'll stare at those
Right,
27
exactly.
on
If
your
you're like, if you
bench.
play it
And so,
cautiously, like if you're just like, oh, well, what if he's banged up and like we don't know what the runouts can be? It's very tough. You know me, I am very much not the injury. I don't side on the optimistic side of injuries. I generally play these
yeah.
situations cautiously. But yeah, if you sit Garendo tonight, because in probably 80% of the situations where I probably would have Garendo, I probably am not playing him because of the full week. Like, but if you do need him, because there are gamers out there that just need bodies. But
Yeah.
I think in spots, like I tend to be a little more cautious in these situations. So if you're right, he has like 24 points, you're just gonna be like, oh, Like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Hey, the way best ball is beautiful, except that Garindo and Taylor not on any best ball teams either, and so you're like, all right, what do we? Maybe Garindo. Garindo
Yeah, he
kind of got hot a
probably
little bit,
is.
right? Yeah, Garindo got hot a little bit
Because it was
in
such a
those
good fit,
late
like
rounds.
schematically. Even a Banaconda, I was gonna be. It was if the game was on Sunday, I was gonna be interested in to see how a Banaconda was if he was gonna get any run if Grendo was
Yeah,
out. Because as bad as a Banaconda was with the Jets, I mean, this is a good scheme fit for him. Like this is at Pitt, like he's the same type of. He's better. Grendo's better at breaking tackles than him because I don't think a Banaconda broke a tackle at Pitt. But if you give that dude a runway, he's like old Tevin
yeah.
Coleman. Like you ain't catching him.
Marlon Mack. Remember
Yeah.
those glory days? That's exactly what we're looking. It's exactly what we're looking for here with Evan. I I actually was talking about this on Monday. It's I still am. It's still weird to me, the Elijah Mitchell situation and the fact that they decided to put him on IR before final cuts, so he had to be on IR the entire year. This would seem to be a good opportunity to have Elijah Mitchell maybe available. Every time I go and look at the injury, it doesn't seem like it was serious. It's a that whole backfield is just a confusing situation. A couple more things here on Bucs Chargers. We saw Mike Evans get out targeted by both Sterling Shepard and Jalen McMillan. I think we would both take the opinion that we doubt that happens again. But on Jalen McMillan, he has been running the routes. The targets just happened to find him. I think we saw Sterling Shepard DMP on Wednesday. You seem to be down on this kind of game state, entirely. So I guess you're probably not chasing it. But I guess my question is, are you at least heartened the fact that the targets finally found him? The fact that he has been running these routes, there's at least a chance that this is real, right?
I mean, the opportunity is, I mean, we still have the large sample where he's just been bad. Like he's just
Yeah,
been a bad asset. He's under a yard per out run. Like it's really tough. I think there are just other players this week on a full slate, and I'm sure we'll do one in the uncut gems. We already teased them, I think too. That just
yeah,
like, they just been better players. Like so, I get that he had the two. Like I feel like last week's game was more very like positive variance swung in his favor. Don't believe
yeah,
that he's going to out target Mike Evans very much, very often. We did this like Jalen Tolbert earlier in the season, where it was just like
yep.
everyone got excited about Tolbert. I'm like, well, he's not going to out target CeeDee Lamb like every game, so like let's just chill. And I kind of just feel that way here. He's on the field. Eventually, the targets are going to find you, and you're on the field that much.
I was toying with Stone Smart being my uncut gem after he got 80% route rate and 25% target share after halftime. I didn't do that because I feel like I've been copping out with tight ends like several weeks
He's going to be a
in a row.
popular
Hey, we hit
DFS guy, though.
they hit the thing about Stone Smart. I think you brought up a big important thing with him in the worksheet is that that happened without Lad McConkey, and if they get Lad McConkey back this week, which I would expect they do, then you start to really question what those rates look like. Obviously, Lad
Yeah,
McConkey is going to have a bigger effect on Josh Palmer because Josh Palmer, we saw his usage really spike without McConkey, and so if we miss McConkey again, I mean, obviously Palmer's right back in there as a startable option, but yeah, like it is going to affect Smart. You're not going to expect those types of rates, but this tight end situation has at least been, for the most part, at least viable from a fantasy perspective. Will Dissly did disappoint us a couple times, so certainly a name to know, a name to watch, and will be, as you mentioned, very popular in DFS. One
yeah.
more
I
real
mean, the
quick
main
here.
slate just doesn't have. Not to go on a DFS diatribe, but I will.
Yeah,
I mean, the main slate is just down to because you have Kittle playing tonight and you have Bowers playing on Monday. It's literally down to McBride and Kelsey as like the only pay up tight ends. So it's going to probably be a very wide week where a lot of gamers are just saying, "I'll throw Jake Ferguson, Jordan Akins, or Stone Smart in a lineup and let the football gods take the wheel."
at Calcaterra and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Speaking speaking about the Eagles, there we go. I didn't even mean that transition, but I don't. The Steelers at Eagles is not a game we would normally talk about because it's a 41.5 point total. Eagles 5.5 point favorites. But I do think this whole thing that's going on with Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown is so interesting because I feel like you and I have been talking about it for like a month. The fact that the Eagles just don't throw, and so if we're talking about AJ Brown not getting targets, he is getting targets in the context of the
Yes.
Eagles offense. It's just that they don't throw after halftime, and kind of there you go. He's a 31.6% target share when active. That is legit real wide receiver one kind of
It would
usage.
be number
He's
one in
15.
the NFL.
He's 15th in the league in first half catches, despite missing 3 games. It just so happens he's 119th in the league in second half catches because they don't throw in the second half. Jalen Hurts, I think you put in the worksheet, averages like 7 second half throws since the bye. And so it's a very odd kind of like, and feels kind of manufactured, like rift between these two guys. Like Jalen Hurts is targeting AJ Brown often when he throws the ball. He just doesn't throw the ball often, and that's kind of been something that has been true for several weeks now. So I'm confused why it blew up this week is all. It's
Yeah,
just a
I
weird
I mean just
situation.
production, right? Wide receivers.
Yeah.
Listen, I was a wide receiver. That was my position. You want the ball, man. Even when those 4 for 40s don't cut it sometimes. You're happy to get wins, but you want to do, especially a guy like AJ Brown who's used to putting up stats. You want to put up stats. I mean, it's turned into where he's only been a top 30 scorer in 2 of his past 7 games because the second half run out. I mean, Hurts has, since the bye, has 65 pass attempts over his past 9 games in the second half. For some context, Anthony Richardson has played 5 games over that span and has 76 pass attempts. Like another runner that you would say, like, yeah, that's just been the story. I will say this: if we do get targets, it becomes an interesting dynamic for this game. Because, well, one, the Steelers have been really good against opposing wide receiver ones, but the Steelers also play a lot of aggressive defense. They play a lot of man coverage. They play very physical defense. And that has, like, historically has been like AJ Brown's bread and butter. Like anytime we've ever had AJ Brown against an aggressive man defense, we're like, uh-oh, like he's about to cook.
Yeah.
Because I mean, since he's joined the Eagles, he's #1 in the NFL in yards per out run against man coverage. Only CeeDee Lamb has more actual receiving yards against man coverage than AJ Brown since he's joined the Eagles. And we're talking like a massive target difference between the two. So I'm very curious for the dynamics of this matchup. If we do get more passing volume, one, how Hurts responds to it, because the Steelers have been good. They're a good defense. And then how that plays into the matchup with AJ Brown, because, we would like to bet on AJ Brown against man coverage more often than not. So it is kind of a fun dynamic. I'm in my main home league. I'm going against one of my brother, and he's got AJ Brown, and I'm like, the worst week for this, right? Because now I'm just like, it's like, well, if no, Russell Wilson's not going to be that good without Pickens, like the Eagles coast, it's last Saquon, we're giving him the record. But now that they've started the schism, I'm like feeling it, like now they're going to force the ball to AJ Brown against man coverage. Like, I don't like this. But yeah, you're obviously playing AJ Brown still, but it's just,
Sure.
it's been frustrating from the box score stance that just the Eagles have been mopping teams and they've been conservative, and Saquon's been cooking. That's really all that's to it.
Yeah, there's like that's the part of it that's odd to me, is like you could point to everything and say, I mean, you're getting exactly the usage that is there in this offense. So like I get, you could be mad at the offense, not mad at Jalen Hurts. It's kind of was my thoughts on it. I will say, I mean, Hurts has not played great. Hurts under pressure has specifically not been great. This is not a good spot for him. You talked about, can the Steelers push them? I mean, you're avoiding the Steelers passing game entirely without George Pickens. I don't know. Like, I don't know if they can. And so, yeah, I have questions too about this game and kind of where this ultimately
This
goes.
feels
But it
like
is
an under too, and I know it's not a high total, but this
41 and a half.
feels
Yeah.
it feels kind of. Do you remember the Thursday night game when Washington played the Eagles, and like Saquon had a couple long runs that popped at? But do you remember how that game was? That game state was up until
Yeah.
Saquon broke it open. That's kind of how I feel this game is going to play out.
Yeah. This Eagles defense is legit. Like, this is everything that's happening with this Eagles defense is real. And so it's going to be tough, I think, for the Steelers this week. Let's go back to the chat. We've got a couple questions here. I see Coker over McMillan. I mean, I think Coker's back this week, but I mean, that's
I
McMillan.
would
We
say
don't even know if
that's one
Coker's
where
going
I
to
would
play.
actually just play McMillan though.
Yeah. We don't know if Coker's even
Yeah.
going to play. We got here with Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet, or Romeo Dubs. I mean, whoever plays out of that one, Walker or Charbonnet, you're playing over Dubs. I think that seems fairly straightforward. This one is interesting, though. I do want to talk a little bit about Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, or Brian Robinson for higher ceiling. From a ceiling perspective, I think that's probably Brian Robinson, just given the game state and the matchup and all of that stuff. But I mean, Chuba Hubbard might get 30 carries this week. Like, that's the kind of the role that we're looking at here. I don't know how that offense is going to score, and I don't know if he can get like 3 touchdowns, which I think like Brian Robinson could definitely get. But I would start Chuba Hubbard because, I mean, what would be your projection for Chuba Hubbard carries this week? 20? Like, where are we putting the over under? It's going to be a massive number.
Yeah, I mean, Chuba Hubbard's going to be the most popular running back in DFS this weekend for sure, given his price and projected workload. And we're getting the Panthers as a home favorite. This is the
Yeah,
first time in 33
there you
games
go.
the Panthers have been favored. They snapped the streak. Now the Patriots have it. It's 14 games. The Patriots, to just give you some context to how long it's been since the Panthers were favored in a game. No Miles Sanders, no Jonathan Brooks. Now I believe Blackshear also got hurt last week.
That's
Like
correct.
so.
He missed practice on Wednesday.
Yeah,
So
so I
yeah,
mean, it's going to be a massive Chuba Hubbard game against and a great matchup too. So
it
I
is.
would even say that he'd be the clear cut guy. I would just play over those guys. So I mean, you're
I
going to
would
get a
play him
couple
too.
catches. Yeah,
I I'm just saying from a ceiling perspective, I don't see this Cowboys like the Panthers have been much better. The Panthers are like 15th in points per drive over the since the bye week,
they
and
just
we've
went from
seen
being
Bryce Young,
terrible
and
to mid range.
exactly. And they've had two tough matchups over that. I mean, they played the Chiefs. The Chiefs defense has not been, what it was. And then they played the Eagles last week. And so those are two toughish matchups. And so you do have some faith in this Panthers offense. I have much more faith in the Commanders offense creating scoring opportunities and Brian Robinson being the one to get, convert those scoring opportunities. So if I'm talking pure ceiling outcome, that's why I kind of look at Brian Robinson. But like from a floor plus ceiling, like trying to say who should I put in my lineup, you feel so good about Chuba Hubbard, that potential opportunity that we could see here. And that, like you said, in a good matchup with an offense that at least has been league average over the past, 3 games, which can you imagine thinking that at the beginning of the year that that's what we'd be getting here out of out of the Panthers? I mean, we'd be getting at least league average offense. So it's there. So another couple ones here. I don't Adunze or Isaiah Davis. I mean, that's you can answer that if you want. I do think the Isaiah Davis Braylon Allen situation is interesting. The usage that we saw this past week with a complete timeshare here. They're going up against the Jaguars. We don't expect the Jaguars to really be able to put the Jets into a super negative game script. The Jets are one of those road favorites, by the way, 3.5 point road favorites. I don't know about that team being a road favorite, but here we are. But I
Been
would
there a
expect
few
this to be
times
more
with
of a
them,
low.
huh?
Yeah, I would expect this to be a low scoring game. I would expect this to be a game where the Jets can ride the running backs. And so maybe we're going to get, 12, 15 touches out of Isaiah Davis in a good matchup. So it is an interesting situation with him. You have any kind of overarching thoughts on either of those guys, Isaiah Davis or Odunze?
I think it's a classic again, floor versus ceiling type of play, right? Like if you're trying to get 8+ points, I think Isaiah Davis is in a good spot to get touches. The Jaguars bad against receiving backs too, which looks like that is at least Isaiah Davis's role. But you still have the Adunze hammer, right? Like Adunze could beat Davis on 2 catches. Like that
Yeah.
exists in the range of outcomes. Now his floor is significantly lower. That's where it comes into play, like how you want to shoot. So I think it just depends on context of what you need for your roster or what you feel like you need based on your matchup. But I mean, if you read the
Another
worksheet
upside
last
question.
week when Hall was ruled out, I wrote it up. I was like, Braylon Allen's not someone to chase in DFS. He's not someone that you believe is going to have. He's not going to have Breece Hall's workload, and also Breece Hall up to that point had been very sketchy. Like anytime you have one of these situations, it's always weird. Where it's like, yeah, well, like the guy that was getting all of the work wasn't even that good. So like, what happens when it's a backfield split?
I think I put it in the waiver column. But like I can't remember since when, but it's been a pretty long time. Braylon Allen is averaging 3.8 yards per touch, which is like Ezekiel Elliott bad.
And
That's
some of
not
that is
good.
influence too. I made sure like
Sure.
don't get married to the efficiency with Braylon Allen because of the opportunities he was getting in context of the offense with Breece Hall. But also we couldn't ignore Isaiah Davis. Like Aaron Rodgers was talking up Isaiah Davis 2 weeks ago, and it was like if we know Rodgers basically runs the team, so it was like I'm not going to ignore that.
It is going to be interesting when Rodgers is no longer a Jet. Did he cut
What
himself?
franchise he
Like, is that
ruins next?
that'll be interesting? It's like if LeBron gets traded, did he trade himself? Those are the questions
Well,
we
he
have to
became
ask.
NFL LeBron, but just not as performing like a level LeBron sustained. Like LeBron keeps he's still been LeBron. Like Rodgers hasn't been
Yeah,
Rodgers. And
yeah.
peak Rodgers was so
They're
good.
both equally bad GMs though. So
Yes.
that is
And Jordan was a terrible GM too, to be fair to like
oh, you don't have to tell the Charlotte folks about that. Certainly don't. One more kind of upside question here, then we'll move on to Uncut Gems. Uh, this is pure moonshot. Need a moonshot. Jameis Winston, Caleb Williams, or Anthony Richardson. I think Anthony Richardson's the option there, just because he could just run for like four touchdowns, and there we are. But I mean, like Jameis Winston, I was out on him last week because of that Steelers matchup. He still attempted a ton of passes. He's averaging like 43 passes a game.
Hmm.
The matchup this week against the Chiefs is not what it was early in the season. You're certainly not as scared of it as you were. It looks like he's going to be getting Cedric Tillman back. We'll see what happens with David Njoku. But like, if you're just going to throw 45 attempts at the wall every week with Jameis, like he can just throw for 5 touchdowns, or he can throw for 5 interceptions. That's why Jameis Winston is the most fun player in the NFL, because we just don't know what's going to happen with him. What about that? Winston versus Richardson from kind of like a ceiling perspective. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think I'm just Winston still. Because
Interesting.
even though Richardson, because we haven't seen like Richardson's gotten there a couple times, but it's been like low 20s, where like we've still just seen a higher ceiling from Winston, and we know the volume's going to be there still too. I will say just kind of that, be like do the weather watch thing this week, because I mean I'm looking outside my window. It doesn't look very nice outside right now, so just kind of see what's happening. Maybe we don't get Jameis 40 pass attempts and it's a gross game, but I would lean
I can
Jameis.
I can tell you that those of you who would like a peek behind the curtain on a running joke in the Sharp Football Analysis Slack and meetings is how Rich Rebar doesn't care about weather at all and doesn't think it's important. So if he's talking about weather, we are paying attention, and we're watching it. That's not true. That's not fair to Rich. He cares about wind, right? Wind is what we care about.
I
That's
mean,
that's the
yeah,
one.
it's all in context. It's all in context of
Fair enough.
what it is actually going to be and stuff. So we're in that time of year though, where these outdoor games in the Northeast could be impacted by things.
Fair enough.
So.
Let's
And
watch it.
the
Let's
one
watch
other
the
element too is if it ends up being like a bogged down game, like the Chiefs want to play a bogged down game. This is where they live. Like they're born in the darkness of playing terrible football. Like they want this game to just be gross and stupid.
yeah, so they can win it at the end, and just validate my now it appears evergreen tweet about how they will never ever get punished for what they've
The
decided to
books
do.
got wise because there was that stretch there where like they were just
Yeah.
still making them like 14-point favorites. Like I think they were 14-point favorites against Carolina. The Raiders, they were laying 9, and like it's telling that they opened only 4-point favorites against this 3-10 Browns team.
We have learned our lesson. We have learned our lesson for sure on this one. All right, let's move on. Let's do some uncut gems. I've already kind of hinted at what mine is, but I don't know what your uncut gem is. Again, these are guys that might not be rostered in as many leagues, might not be like guaranteed starters. We're not saying that like they have to be in your lineup, but if you have some questionable flex options, these are guys that might be able to do a job for you. Who do you got this week?
Yeah, mine is the guy we talked about that we had producer Matt look up. It's Devaughn Vele.
There you
Uh,
go.
right before the bye, he had a terrible matchup because if you look at Devaughn Vele and his role in the offense, like he is pure slot receiver, which is interesting because he's like a really big dude, but he has very wide splits against man and zone coverage. He's only been targeted on 15% of his routes against man coverage. That goes to 23.4% against zone coverage. He was facing the Browns, an aggressive defense. And then we've also seen, him facing this Gus Bradley zone-centric defense. They play the lowest rate of man coverage. They also play the third highest rate of cover 3. He has been targeted on 27% of his routes against cover 3, 1.99 yards per out run. He's also second on the team behind Courtland Sutton in plays, targets that result in the first down or touchdown. So I've kind of got him on the board. A lot of these gamers, if you're in the fantasy playoffs, you're probably not doing uncut gems, but if you do, he's out there.
That's kind of where I was as well, where I was like, how deep do I actually go with this?
Yeah.
I'm just going to go with McCormick because, like I said, I brought him up whenever Madison and White first went down. I've been driving the train for a bit. Last week really solidified it for me that Madison was held out again, despite limited practices. It does look like Madison's going to be active, but we've already heard Antonio Pierce
Yeah.
say that they're going to give it to McCormick. We'll see. Coaches do pull the rug on us from time to time, but McCormick got 93.8% of the running back carries. He ran 10 routes with 3 targets compared to 16 routes with 2 targets to Amir Abdullah. So even got some of him in the passing game. If Desmond Ritter starts this game, like you're attached to a Desmond Ritter led offense, which doesn't make you feel great. And the Falcons are not as good of a matchup for running backs as they appear to be now for the passing games and quarterbacks over the last couple of weeks. But I like the guy. I think he's a decent running back. I like his opportunity. I think that he could end up getting 15 touches, 15, more than 15 touches here. Maybe he gets 80 yards. Maybe he gets in the end zone. That's the level that we're talking about here from McCormick. So if you have, actual good options, we're not putting him over that. But if you're really desperate at a flex spot, he's at least going to get the touches. He at least, I think, is going to have opportunities at touchdowns. The matchup is not one that you're shying away from. Put all that together, and that's an uncut gem. He to me is like a quintessential uncut gem. All right, I don't feel great about it, but we're hoping for the best if we get these touches. And you're not going to push back on McCormick. I love
No,
it.
I mean,
I
I
love
think
it.
I think he's. I mean, we talked. You expected me to push back last week when you said you didn't think I'd care. And it was like, no, yeah, this is it's wide open for him. Like this is, it's not quite like the Broncos situation.
Fair enough.
That was my
If I
thing
had brought
last
up
week. It was
if I had brought up if I'd brought up McCormick in week 2, you definitely would have had would have had thoughts about it. The season, we're deep into the season. Christmas around the corner. We got the lights behind us. We're feeling festive. We're feeling festive and excited. That's where we are. All right.
I almost
That's
pulled
it
out
for
the
us.
Christmas hat today, but I felt 2 weeks was too early. I'll wear the Christmas hat next week.
We're getting Christmas hat next week. I wonder. I believe that I have a. I believe I have a Christmas. I believe I have a Santa hat and beard combo. So maybe we can find that and do that. The only picture I have of me in the Santa hat and beard combo is while holding a knife on Halloween. So maybe we could maybe we could do something a little more festive for that. We appreciate you listening to the podcast at this point. Make sure you go to YouTube, subscribe, get notified when we go live. You can be part of the chats as we do this. Like I said, every single Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. If you're listening to this podcast, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find all of Rich's work for this week. You'll find his rankings. So if you have questions we didn't get to, his rankings are there. You'll find his worksheet previews, previewing every single fantasy relevant player and every single game. If you are a Sharp Football subscriber, you have access to his Sunday morning chats where he answers all sorts of start sit questions. Really anything you want to know about fantasy football, he answers those. All of that is part of our NFL Plus package. You can use promo code SAVE325 to get $325 off for the remainder of the season. Also in that package are Warren Sharp's betting recommendations. Doing great this year. $100 bettors up over $11,000. So make sure you check all of that out. And Rich and I will be back to talk with you next week.